Tasha Simms here with
Mark Caron.
And you're listening to Conscious Living Radio, 100.5 FM in Vancouver on Co-op Radio Wednesday night, 6 to 7. If you're watching this right now on Facebook or YouTube, hi and welcome. Excited about today's show. We're exploring the potential of coincidences, especially in terms of understanding of reality. And our guest, psychiatrist Bernard Beitman. He's the first psychiatrist since Carl Jung. Just saying that in itself is pretty amazing. The first since Carl to synthesize the study of coincidence. And it really is an interesting thing. We'll get into it. He's a graduate of Yale Medical School, did his psychiatric residency at Stanford, the former chair of psychiatry of the University of Missouri Columbia Medical School for 17 years, writes a blog for Psychology Today on coincidence, and is the co-author of an award-winning book, Learning Psychotherapy. As well, he's the founder of the Coincidence Project. So I would say, and I think I'm pretty accurate, that few people on the planet have studied and understood coincidence the way he does. I think they actually call you the king of coincidence. His new book is called Meaningful Coincidences: How and Why Synchronicity and Serendipity Happen. And he explains why each of us may have more to do with creating coincidence than we think. So we're going to deep dive into what coincidence really is, how to see it, how to interpret it. And my hope would be to utilize it to inspire mental, interpersonal, spiritual growth, because that's what else is there if it's not inspiring you to live like that. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Tasha and Mark.
So I know you've devoted a lot of time to legitimizing the study of coincidence. And for you, clearly, it's way more than some random piece of fate. Why don't we start generally and you give us your take on synchronicity and what called you to dedicate an entire book to the subject?
It's my second book on the subject. The first one, called Connecting with Coincidence, which was mostly a book of stories showing how coincidences occur in almost every aspect of life: personal, social, work, financial, and spiritual, as well as medical. And the discovery of new ideas, especially in medicine, pharmacologically. So I've been into it for quite a while. And why do I do it? Well, one reason has to do with the idea of teleology. Teleology is an idea that Carl Jung was very interested in, that we are drawn to the future, that what we do now is caused by what might happen or what we think is going to happen. And intuitively, I think I recognized that we needed to get systematic about meaningful coincidences, which includes synchronicity and serendipity. There's a lot of talk, a lot of stories, a lot of speculations about explanations, which are really a lot of fun after a while for me to listen to people talk about, because everybody knows they got the right idea about what that thing is. And when that happens, I say, okay, I mean, nothing I can do about it. But what's important is that they happen.
And do you use the words interchangeably, coincidence, synchronicity, and serendipity? Are they the same, or is there a difference for you?
No, the reason why the book title has Meaningful Coincidences is that both synchronicity and serendipity are forms of meaningful coincidences. And in the book, I describe the history of those words, as well as two other meaningful coincidences, one called seriality and another simulpathity, because it's an umbrella term, meaningful coincidences. And not all coincidences are meaningful. And the idea that they aren't is really a benefit. Some of them aren't, because coincidence, I use it because it's a commonly used term. Synchronicity sounds woo-woo to too many people. Serendipity sounds, well, little less so, but it's...
Oh, really? For me, it's the opposite. So serendipity is like fairy tale to me. Synchronicity is Carl Jung. Like
now, and now you're illustrating what I needed to know. is that people have favorite
There-
words.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And a lot of people use serendipity where others would use synchronicity. It's just
Yeah.
it's just the way it is right now. And I got a little tired of all that kind of arguing, and was able to see that they were related to each other. And the people that I work with on the Coincidence Project are with you. Synchronicity is the thing. Serendipity is, well,
Mary Poppins.
as Mary Poppins. Well, for you, Mary Poppins
me.
people, for you, Mary Poppins people, yeah, I can show you papers that show you that Nobel Prize winners attribute lucky accidents to their discoveries quite often, rather than that there was systematic research. Something strange happened, weird happened, but they noticed that the weirdness produced something that might be useful. And that's the way penicillin was discovered, by accident. They're lucky accidents. So serendipity, in my view, is a little more practical in the sense of material things, ideas, money, suggestions about health, where synchronicity is more about, as you mentioned earlier, it's more about spiritual, interpersonal, and psychological. And that makes sense. Jung was a psychiatrist who did psychotherapy.
So I would love to get practical with this subject. I think that's the thing, as you say, that's been missing, like this practical application. So I wonder, could we go over the different types of coincidence and also how to recognize the patterns? I think the learning to interpret or utilize it is such a key piece here. Can we do that?
We the different types of coincidences. There's like various lists of them. And one way I can answer that question is data from the Weird Coincidence Survey, which is, if you're a psychologist or statistician, you know that the words valid and reliable are important for any survey. That means that it measures something that's valid and measures it in a reliable way. And it took a lot of work to get research assistants to create this Weird Coincidence Survey with our help. But what I want to mention is the most common coincidences. And I bet you and Mark know these personally. And one of the most common ones is thinking about someone, especially if you haven't heard from them for a long time, and they contact you. That's common. And what people don't like to recognize in modern science is that's telepathy. Not always, but if your mother's going to call at 2 p.m. and she doesn't call till 2:05, you kind of know that's a cause. When you know what the cause is, it's no longer a coincidence, because to define a coincidence is the coming together, usually of two events that do not appear to be causally related, but seem to have a suggestion about how they may be related, but they're not obviously causally related. Lightning and thunder were one example of that. The gods were throwing thunderbolts is how people thought about it, but now it's the heat of the lightning bolt heats the air around it, and that causes a rapid expansion and contraction of the air around it, and that's why we hear thunder. Afterwards, it goes more slowly than light. So that's what I'm trying to do with coincidences, is be able to talk about how the two are related. But when you come to starting with coincidence like synchronicity, Jung was very interested in the fact that they weren't obviously causal. Telepathy isn't exactly a cause. So you asked me about common coincidences, and if you'd like me to continue on that way, I will do that.
Yes, please.
Another common one is being in the right place at the right time. And as you want to get practical, there's something missing in that statement. You can be in the right place at the right time, but you got to notice that you're there. You got to notice it. And the key thing here is noticing.
Right.
And another way of saying that is being in the right place at the right time. Sometimes you have to act. It just doesn't happen to you. You're very familiar with The Secret, I'm sure, of imagining things and they happen for you. No, you've got to act. So there's stories of people running through airports, seeing somebody they really want to get to know, and they got to grab that person.
Right.
One person became a job, and another person became a marriage. And you have to act in the moment. It's, seize the moment is a key idea, but especially for meaningful coincidences. So that's another common one, being in the right place at the right time.
And what about some uncommon ones? Because to me, I think the ones for me that are most fascinating is where there's it feels like, and again, I'm a big feeler, so I'm not science girl, but I'm practical. But it's this feeling that there is meaning here. It's the whole idea of meaning, and I need to connect those dots. I can see that something is happening that feels random, kind of out of the ordinary, but I am the one who either I can receive this information and connect the dots, or I miss the opportunity. That's the feeling. I don't know how else to say it.
Very well said. Very well said. I like to encourage people to develop a coincidence sensitivity button in their minds, so that they have had enough experiences, and now we're talking about more experiences and weirder coincidences, so that you can have a little button that goes, and says, "Oh, hey, Tasha, notice, look," and then mark, act. That's right. You got to have that button going, because if you don't have the button, it could happen and it wasn't there. So you've got that, and you're referring to something called feeling. Oh, that's a nice, really funny thing to do. Feeling. I think you're talking about intuition too. I think intuition is a very important part of all this. So part of what we try to help people do is sharpen their intuitive capacities. We can talk about that too, but being able to recognize a coincidence is where it starts, and then being able to act on it when necessary are two parts of it. But why don't you tell me a coincidence story, Tasha, that you think's like a little weird?
I have so many. I won't do current because I've got too many feelings about it. Like we had one happening just before we started the interview, but I'm not going there. For me, it's as a therapist, it's clients. Always clients that will walk in my room are often mirroring certain things that are happening in my life. That one's already become common. That's not even weird to me anymore. The one that was most amazing.
Wait, let me pause you on that one. I don't get people telling me that often enough.
Really?
No, I call them mind mirrors sometimes too, and that's what you just did. And what kind of therapist are you?
Very somatic, transpersonal psychotherapist.
Oh, fanatic. Okay, good. Because what I'm trying to do with mental health is bring synchronicity into the practice of mental health. And you may know, I would suggest, if you want me to send it to you later, but Yvonne Tarnas, a psychologist in San Francisco, wrote her dissertation to get her PhD on something she called fated meetings. And it was just what you said. Your problems walk into your office.
Yeah. And your issues, for me anyway, even going deeper, I know how I'm doing. My barometer of how I'm doing with my own personal issues are how neutral I am with the people with the same, especially if they're, let's say, a perpetrator or something, right? Let's say I've got some unhealed, trauma, but this person walks in who is the one who would have inflicted the trauma but not on me, obviously, in their own life. And I'm neutral. And that neutrality to me is like a barometer of going, okay, good, or affairs, let's say, having a history of, an ex who had many, many affairs, being neutral. That's not a neutral subject if people are still working through betrayal. But it tells me I've worked through it, because I'm quite neutral and compassionate to both sides, including, you could say, the perpetrator. I don't know, for lack of a better word. Does that make sense?
Oh, it's more than makes sense. It's like right on. It's what you're telling me is a use in countertransference in the therapist,
right,
that is based on the idea that our minds are mirrored in our environments, and that's I'm doing a talk on how to cultivate meaningful coincidences and have title mirrors of your mind. And so that's a nice little coincidence for me with you to have that expanded upon in just the way that you did. So that's great.
That's cool. But the one I did want to tell you about happened a long time ago, but it was so big and life-changing for the people involved that I was just dumbstruck in the moment. It was huge. So I was teaching, it was a group of people, it was a 3-year counselor training program. One of the years you do a genogram. So there'd be 30 people in the class, and they would work on this all year long. And then they would do a presentation, and we would sit and watch and ask questions, systemic family questions, looking for emotional transmission, all kinds of things. And as this one student is presenting his parents, grandparents sort of history, and it's on the wall on these big, huge pieces of bristlebored. We're all sitting watching with the other students, and he's naming people. We're asking questions. He's naming people, writing them in. And all of a sudden, the girl beside me, the student, starts sobbing. And I'm going, are you okay? Like, I put my hand out in his presentation. She sees her lineage, because she had no idea. She was I guess somebody had an affair, and she was the hidden daughter, and she had never tracked it all the way. But as he was using names, all of a sudden she was recognizing people in her genogram from his board. So it's his half sister, basically. The presenter's half sister. That's 30 people. I don't know what the stats are, but I know that they've got to be off the charts here to find your half sister in a genogram presentation that you had no knowledge of. That's pretty freaky, right?
Yes and no. I mean, from the perspective of anybody in the class, including you, it's like far out and groovy. It's low probability. It's extremely unlikely. And part of what needs to happen is to find out ways that we can judge the probability of an event like that, because it's the surprise of it, the amazement of it, almost the awe of it. Jung used the word numinous to mean both it's scary and it's awesome. It fills you with both of those feelings. Mm-hmm. And for her, there's a tingly. I had a tingly with somebody I was walking around with. That's a little bit of a longer story that we can do, but that tingling feeling is part of that numinous experience. So that makes it even more special. But when I say that it's maybe not as strange as you might think, I'm very much interested in knowing what our intuition can tell us. And our intuition has more information than our rational minds have. Rational minds have stored away a lot, but the intuition can come up with stuff the rational mind can't find. And you can not know where it came from. That's what intuition usually means, but it's relevant to the present. And one aspect of the intuition, which is a broad name for a lot of stuff going on in there, is being able to get to the right place that you need to be without knowing how you got there. And one of the stories that is like that is a 18-year-old with a gun, her father's gun in her car, driving out to a lake in a remote forest, and thinking about blowing her brains out with father's gun. And as she's thinking about that, a car drives up, and she looks over, and it's her brother. And she says, "How come you're here? You've never been here before. I know that." He said, "I just felt the need to come here." That's being at the right place at the right time and following a drive inside himself to be able to save his sister's life. So she's around now, so she could tell me that story. So I use that, I call that human GPS or inner GPS, that we have the ability to track our realities, to know where we need to get to find out what we need to know. And I would suggest to you that this woman somehow, in the ways we have to yet study, and I use the psychosphere as an idea about that. A psychosphere, I think, is our mental atmosphere. We are immersed in a mental atmosphere that connects and unites us in ways that meaningful coincidence demonstrates to us, and that we have powers and abilities that we are not told we have, which include telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, as well as this human GPS thing, which is a combination of some of those. So we have abilities, and I'm trying to be able to say through meaningful coincidence that we have abilities that we need to begin to take the data, be practical. You just have told two excellent stories about mirrors, and you told a story about this mirror of her mind on the blackboard. You're a mirror kind of person. You're not an Aquarius, are you?
I have Aquarius rising, yes.
That it's there's something that each of us has certain talents, certain capacities, and meaningful coincidences help illustrate for our rational mind that we have these abilities. But because I went to Yale and Stanford, was chairman of a psychiatry department, I can come up here and say crazy things because I have the creds to be able to do that. And
That's right.
there's a reason for that. I've studied this stuff and I've tried to make it reasonable and understandable, but it's still weird stuff. But we have this ability. You're the mirror woman so far anyway.
I love this. And I love that you're doing that, because I think we need more of that, right? There's, I don't know how else, I don't know why people need it so badly, that kind of, what is it that, let me ask it as a question. Let me see if I can do that. What is it about science that's so reassuring compared to trusting intuitive information that doesn't need to be proven? It's a knowing. Why is one reassuring and the other seems to be so, what's the word? So
woo maybe.
I guess
That's the one I was coming up
Were you
with.
thinking
That was the
woo-woo?
woo, yeah.
Okay, Mark.
Yeah.
Well, we chimed in together on that one. Well, the reasons for that have to do with the Enlightenment and the 1500s. Science began to take over, and the rational mind began to overwhelm the intuitive mind, which had been existing in the Western world for a while and certainly continues to other places. Some of it, to me, is the degradation of women. That women tend to have a more intuitive ways of thinking about things and being able to trust them, especially when you're taking care of a child, but on many other ways. So that even the emphasis in Christianity of on a man, Jesus, and without paying attention to Mary, who had her own ways of experiencing things, it's a balance that needs to be brought out. And the yin and the yang, people are saying more and more, need better balance. So it's not just put down intuition or put down rationality. My view, as I try to say in my book, is that you need your rationality to test your intuition, because sometimes you get these intuitive messages and they mess you up. And you got to find out the voices, the gut feelings, the sense that you have that this one I should follow. And you test that out, that this sounds right to me, whereas others, you got to discard. And that's where rationality and intuition or yin and yang or masculine and feminine become partners, which is what we need.
And how do you think society could be supported to evolve in a healthy way if more people understood what you just said?
Well, it might not surprise you that I think being aware of meaningful coincidences will help, because the meaningful coincidences challenge rationality. That it's not like what we're being told. So what else is going on? And when you get that intuitive feeling and you're there, you begin to have to put the two together. So part of the purpose of the Coincidence Project, which I have founded and am president now, it's a nonprofit in the state of Virginia, is to get people to tell each other coincidence stories. Because I think synchronicity in its spiritual, emotional, interpersonal, and psychological senses can help bring us together and help us individually bring our rationality and our intuition together.
And can you explain, perhaps dive in a little bit about how our hearts, brains, bodies actually sync up? How are we interconnected there? Can you kind of bring some science into it? Maybe some.
You'd have to go to the heart math guys for that one. They got more science than I do about that. Meditators can describe it, but I don't have access to the science of hooking brain, mind, and heart and gut together. What you're saying is necessary, but my thing has been more about synchronicity and bringing intuition and rationality together and exploring the psychosphere through those ideas.
Mm-hmm. Is there a shadow side to coincidence?
What do you think?
Oh, don't toss it back at me now.
Come on.
There's a shadow side
you're
to
the therapist. You're a therapist, and I'm a therapist, and I like asking my therapist questions.
There is a shadow side to everything.
Yes, there is. I mean, this is polarity, ladies and gentlemen. This earth is polarized, and politics are only one major representation of that. There is light and dark where we are here. I mean, it's male and female. This is if you chose to live on this earth, which some of us think we might have, or in my case, I was sent here as an anthropologist to figure out what's going on with these human being things. But we all have our own little ideas about why we're here and what we're supposed to do. Of course, it has a shadow side, and I mean, I like Tasha, that you're a therapist and you do the mirror things. And what's important to me in talking to you as a therapist is that I want to make sure or increase the likelihood of therapists being taught to use meaningful coincidence. Now, there is data for synchronicity being useful in therapy. Coming out of Germany. Riefschlager is a name of a person who's been involved with that. And I have a Psychology Today post, and I can send you an abstract of the article.
Yeah, I love it.
To be able to see that. So there's data to say that synchronicity is useful in psychotherapy. It's preliminary, but it's a start. So I'd like to see psychotherapists help get this idea out. Because one of the crazy difficulties, therapists trained in traditional ways respond to people who are having a lot of meaningful coincidences. They're crazy.
Right.
Get out the antipsychotic right now, whatever is popular.
You know, for me, what's so fascinating as a transpersonal psychotherapist, and I think this connects to with the shadow side of coincidence. So one of my pet peeves is people making meaning. It used to really annoy me, Mark, you know this. All of a sudden we get someone who's now naming all the angels and the this, and it's this, and it came from the seventh dimension. Like there's a whole story created. And I go, well, it's a lovely story, but intuitively, everybody's story is simply you making meaning that is relevant to you, and maybe some other people will follow it too. Awesome. But to me, as a therapist, for a healthy relationship to exist between people, there has to be room for multiple realities, plain and simple. It can't be one. If we only think there's one reality, we're going to fight about who's right about the reality. But if I can learn to stretch some sort of a muscle that goes, okay, here's what's going on in me, and here's the meaning I'm making, which is why I feel the way I feel. And how about you? What meaning are you making right now from what just happened? And what are you feeling? So now we've got two people in the same container being 100% themselves, but nobody has to be right. That to me is the key to freedom, what I just described. The shadow side is when people get attached to the meaning and not understanding that that creates division. When you're attached to, I believe, if you're attached to it, it creates a kind of division. Does that make sense for you?
You're making a lot of sense, Tasha. You don't have to ask me that anymore. Yes, it makes a lot of sense, but I'm glad I asked you what you meant by shadow side, because that's not what I mean by it. And now we can what we can do is put our meanings right next to each other.
There you go.
And let's talk about the meaning of meaning when it comes to synchronicity. There are actually 4 meanings in a meaningful coincidence. One of them is the emotion. The other is the similarity between the 2 parts in it. The meaning of this one is similar to that one, the mind mirror one. But the ones we're talking about are what's it mean for me personally in my life? And then the one that you just described as the dark side is arguing about explanation, arguing about what the nature of reality is. And I listen to people's stories about how they think things work, and I got to be able to think somehow that maybe it might be true. One of the things that maybe you've seen, you know what spiritual bypassing is, I assume.
Yeah, I can't stand it.
I mean, some of these stories are ways of avoiding what's here in reality.
Yeah.
And I got to bring this stuff, and I think you do too, into your life. It's got to be right here. So how can we put these experiences into your life? So let's move away from that form of polarity or shadow, and actually look at coincidences or meaningful coincidences that aren't so happy, ones in which the coincidence is not a positive thing, because most of us think of synchronicity as well, it's always wonderful. It isn't. There are minor bad ones and there are major bad ones. I'll give you one minor bad one, not so minor, but there's this guy on an airplane going for an interview for a job he's looking for, and as you should do if you're looking for a coincidence, he started talking to the guy next to him. And the guy next to him was going to the same city, and the guy next to him turned out to be the boss of the guy that was going to interview the person I'm talking about. And they had a great conversation, the boss and the guy looking for the job. So the guy looking for the job thought, oh, this boss is going to tell the guy who's interviewing me to give me the job. Well, it was a nice coincidence, but he didn't get the job. So sometimes there are false promise coincidences. They seem to promise something, but they don't deliver. And there may be other reasons for it, but you have to look for what seemed obvious. They even get the job and he didn't. So that was a negative coincidence, a negative synchronicity or serendipity is more what I'd call it.
May I ask a question about that, Bernard?
Please.
So in that example, it makes me think of what you talked about at the beginning about right place, right time. You know, the guy might have been at the right place at the right time, but maybe he didn't articulate himself well enough in that conversation with that person. You know what I mean? Like, how do we judge necessarily the outcome, or, put the meaning that maybe it was this offering and it's like, here's the offering, and then you've got 2 choices. If you do this, does that make sense?
Maybe he messed up in talking to the guy on the plane is what you're suggesting.
Yes, it's a possibility.
It's a possibility. And maybe the guy who interviewed him never talked to the boss and didn't have to, because he didn't want the guy to work for him either. There's a lot of different variables. And what the mirroring thing brings up, and there are often 2 people in a coincidence. That's what we're talking about here. And it's important not to just stay with yourself and your opinion, but find out what it means for the other person to have this coincidence. Like to ask, okay, so I'm applying for a job. What does that mean to you that I'm on the plane next to you? I bet he didn't talk about that. But there are other relationships that are like that. But that's that's a very important thing to emphasize, that people get very self-centered with their coincidence stories and don't pay attention. Hey, wasn't there somebody else involved with this?
That's good.
Yeah, no, that is. Thank you.
But
You're welcome.
you were going down a road. I don't think you completed your thought. Can you?
Oh, you're such a therapist, Tasha. I love it. I mean, you remember. You remember. Most interviewers don't do that. They forget. So you did that. Yes, I was going down another road to the further down the road of coincidence is not good.
Right.
So I have two examples. Some guy, a geologist, is in an island in the South Seas and sees a mountaintop that looks like it has certain geological capacities. And indeed it did. It had some minerals in there that were very valuable to big corporations. So he made a serendipitous finding. He got paid for that, and they excavated the top of the mountain. That's very nice. But the people at the bottom of the mountain got inundated with all kinds of falling stuff on them. The villages around that mountain got destroyed by that serendipitous discovery. So there's an example of which there are many, where it was good for one part of the formula and not good for the other. So that's another form of the downside of coincidences. And the third one is a woman, 41-year-old woman, studying distant healing in the 1990s with people with AIDS, and not even telling them that people were praying for them, and seeing the outcomes between those who were prayed for and those who weren't. And the outcomes were good enough for the National Institute of Health to give her a grant to study neuroblastoma. And neuroblastoma is a rapidly growing brain cancer that is difficult to treat because it's so rapid. And shortly after she began that study, she was diagnosed with neuroblastoma.
Wow. Right. Wow. You, I know you started in cardiology. Is there a story from there as well that of coincidence like this that you can bring to the table?
Oh, yes, ma'am, there sure is. Go for that one. So glad you asked. No, I didn't. I wanted in medical school, I wanted to be a cardiologist or a psychiatrist. And then I realized the heart is just a pump and the brain is a little more complicated, as you might think.
Yeah.
So even though it's a complicated pump, there's a lot to it. So I don't think I would have been good for it and good for me, but I was still very interested in cardiology. And so when I was leaving the University of Washington, where I was 10 years before I went to the University of Missouri in Columbia, I've been working parallel with a colleague, Wayne Caton was his name. He was consulting in family practice. I was consulting in primary care internal medicine, and we had some stuff to share. And I felt competitive with him. He didn't feel competitive with me. I found out later. That's more me, and I think it was true. So I was standing outside his office door for the last time, being on the 16th floor of the medical building at the University of Washington, deciding whether or not to say goodbye to him. I knocked on the door. He was in there. I walked in and hey, Wayne, how you doing? And I looked on his desk, and there was a paper by Bass and Wade on chest pain and panic disorder. I said, hey, Wayne, what's this? I was denied tenure at the University of Washington, which turned out to be a good thing. You got to pay attention to those things too. And went to University of Missouri. I said, Wayne, what's this? What's with this Bass and Wade chest pain and panic? He said, oh, I've developed a one-page protocol on looking for panic disorder in patients with chest pain. I'm going to try it out in family practice. I said, can I get a copy of that? And he had some fill it out yourself instruments, self-report instruments. So okay, so he gave me these 5 pages of paper, and I went to the University of Missouri, and right across the hall from a psychiatry clinic was the cardiology clinic, the back of the cardiology clinic. So we could sneak people out of the cardiology clinic into the psychiatry clinic and do formal evaluations on them. And all that led to my having 40 papers on chest pain and panic disorder, and still probably more than anybody else in the world.
Wow, that's so cool. Well, so I know we only have about 10 minutes left. What would be really valuable to get across to the listeners? So, I mean, I want them to get your book, and, they can find out a whole lot more, but what can we say or talk about right now that you think would kind of invite people to begin to open more to coincidence?
Well, they first have to decide they want to. I mean, you can't do anything if they don't think it's a good idea. And maybe our stories and maybe your stories are going to help them want to. There are others who are further along the line and have lots of them, but don't have anybody to talk with about them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an isolated group. And the Coincidence Project has developed the Coincidence Cafe, which is a Zoom meeting every third Thursday of the month, every third Saturday, rather, every third Coincidence Cafe, every third Saturday of the month at 11 a.m. Eastern time for about an hour and a half. And after some intro about maybe what we'll talk about, people are divided up into small groups of 3 or 4, and they tell each other coincidence stories. And they find their family. They find people who share their passion and their worry about whether they're being crazy about coincidences. They find people that are like them. We call them high-frequency coinciders.
Wow.
High-frequency coinciders. And they very much appreciate the Coincidence Cafe. And they can get to the Coincidence Cafe by putting in their web browser the coincidenceproject.net, all one word, the coincidenceproject.net. And you can find our page, and you'll find not only a place to register for the Coincidence Cafe, but you'll also find a place that you can write your own stories, because we're collecting stories from people. And you can take the Weird Coincidence Survey and see how sensitive you are to coincidences. So those are some things that can expand. Besides reading my book, which is still solitary, I'd like to see book clubs talking about this book, Meaningful Coincidences. Be glad to participate in anyone if somebody wants to put one together, and to establish in-person coincidence cafes in their town. So it would be like here in Charlottesville, Virginia, it'd be Coincidence Cafe Charlottesville.
I love that. That's a fantastic offering. It's open to anybody who's drawn to this.
Yes, open to anybody, free, and we do appreciate donations. We got enough money to run for another year, so we got to come up for some cash, as most of us have to do. But it's free and open to the public.
Love it. And I know Mark's going to put it on our page for anyone listening.
Most of it's already up. I made some notes about the cafe and the book club. I think it's a great idea, and I love that you're bringing, like-minded people in the sense of coincidences and the learning, so that they can have that conversation. Because imagine the guy on the plane as a great example, to have that ability to recognize you're in a coincidence, and then to be able to lean into it and influence, let's say, a positive outcome or something of that nature. Because even like you said, the guy who doesn't get the job or the guy who doesn't get a position, it's because something else is next, but you don't see that at that time. So
exactly,
learning those tools, what a powerful, that's a superpower in itself, I would think.
It is. And the more you see these coincidences, synchronicity, serendipity, the more they happen. The more you see them, the more you see them. That coincidence sensitivity button gets developed.
And I love that it just opens you to this whole non-local awareness, this idea that things are not just, the only thing that exists is, this table or this chair that you actually, there are things you can't physically touch that have as much reality and meaning and importance, if not more at times. The opening to that is just such an exciting portal for me in terms of connectivity.
You're good at this, Tasha. I mean, I think it helps being a therapist. I really do. Yeah, it's especially transpersonal, but it opens a portal. It penetrates the thick steel wall of rationality. It makes you have to look beyond where you think you are.
Yeah. Which, honestly, knowing that, like, I don't think it's being a therapist that gives me that drive. I have felt that since childhood, the desire to penetrate the veil, or whatever you want to call it. I didn't use those words, but I knew what I was seeing was not it. I knew that, like, 100%. But then what is it? What does that even mean? So that whole exploration, I think, once you bring in the sense of coincidence, I don't know how it can't take you, expand you. I don't know how one could open to coincidence and not be expanded by it, because you're already saying there's more than just me in this little body, right? This finite body. You're opening to something bigger, and everyone else. So it's just such a I don't know, beautiful, meaningful journey then, where, everything, there's room for everything. And I love that kind of freedom, as opposed to the tightness of any box, even a path. When people say path, as if there's like one, there isn't, right? There's something so beautiful about this topic to me. And I'm really grateful that you came on the show today. Thank you.
You're welcome. And let's, as we talk about explanation, and we're almost at the end of this, that I don't want to go to the universe for an explanation, which a lot of people do. And I want to see what you think about my idea of the psychosphere, which is I describe in one of the later chapters in the book. The psychosphere is our mental atmosphere. And our mental atmosphere exists much like the air atmosphere. And what we do is breathe in energy, information. The energy and information are intertwined at various degrees, and breathe out, metaphorically, energy and information. And we take it in. We take it out. So the simple version of that is simultaneous independent discoveries, where people find evolution and calculus, and even two different cartoonists on the same day in March 1951 publish a cartoon, one in England and one in the United States, called Dennis the Menace. And they were similar guys. We feed off of the energy information floating around out there, and some of us grab some of that and bring it down here. And that's part of what I'm doing. And what do you think of that idea, just to start?
I went to a number of different places when you were talking about this repeat. I see it a lot with disasters even. And I don't know if it's connected to what you're talking about, where all of a sudden there will be, if there's a plane crash, then there's three more or something. There's some kind of an odd repetition going on. But in terms of one's own personal psychosphere, it's not a word that I guess you coined that word, yes?
I thought I did, but with a lot of things, there's been people like in the last century and the century before using the term. But yeah, I've done this a couple of times. I come up with a word. No, it's been around a long time, and that's an important thing to know, is that just because it happened to you, like that weird thing with the genealogy, it's happening to somebody else, something like that. It's not just you.
Right.
If it happened to you, it's happening, will happen, did happen to somebody else. So no, Tyler D. Chardin called it the noosphere, but the psychosphere has been around as a term for even longer.
Well, that place, as a writer, because I write as well, I will finish a script and I can feel immediately, I go, this one's got a really short shelf life because someone's going to do it within the year if we don't get this out there. And sure enough, all of a sudden Netflix has got two shows on in the same vein. And I'm like, so it becomes a bit, even with the other, I used to get weird creative ideas about things that I only like things that don't exist. I'm not a good follower, but I get very excited when something has come to me and I go, we need this, or usually it's I need this. And so let me find someone to bring it into reality because I'm not the maker. That's not my job, but I do get the creation idea. But I will literally see something I came up with then hit mainstream, at which point I lose interest, but it hits mainstream and like constantly. That's a norm to me. If that's what you're talking about in terms of the psychosphere, it's to me just get into action, because if you don't, right, if you're not really running with it, if you just like there's a gap between the creation and then bringing it into reality. And in that gap, I see everybody jumps into that pool. And I don't know who's picking out of where, but all of a sudden there's repeats going on. Does that land? You get what I mean?
No, it doesn't land. It's in my book. Just what you just said. A woman didn't write the book, and then her friend wrote the book. I mean, and then an agent, not my friend agent, but I told her about something like this, and she says, I recently got 5 authors, each telling me not to tell anybody about what they're writing about, and they were writing about the same thing.
Yeah, like that.
Yeah, it's common.
Mine was superheroes, and it still hasn't been quite made the same, but it's so close. I just thought aging female superheroes hitting menopause, and they start to lose their powers as they question the roles they've been playing using these powers because everything's amok. And so they're in a support group. And I went, brilliant, timely, got to do this. And sure enough, all of a sudden there's this flurry of superhero movies. And I'm going, okay, like I still don't think it's been done. And I probably shouldn't even be talking about it, but whatever. Take it. The next idea will come, like that. But yes, well, I assume it's going to.
One of mine like that as a funny aside was PayPal. Back in the early days of the internet, and I was getting into marketing and learning a whole bunch of stuff and e-commerce. It was really, really difficult. And I says, you need to create like an online, basically exactly what PayPal is. And a year later, there it is in full force. And look where Elon Musk is today.
Yeah, that could have been you.
Hey, I was meant to be here
today.
You can have the idea, but you have to have the capacity too. And you have to also have.
I had no capacity.
Yeah, that's with the synchronicity business. It's coming out at a time that I think the world is ready for it. But it's been at least a lifetime, really, of but 15 years of working at this to come up with being able to be on your show.
That's great.
Well, this has been delightful. That's the word I would use. I feel fantastic. I love when this kind of, I see it as like things bubbling together, and the alchemy is just so delicious. So thank you very much. Tell us about your podcast real quick before we go. You've got a podcast yourself, yeah?
Yeah, if you put my name in, Bernard Beitman, you're going to find a bunch of things. One of them is a podcast called Connecting with Coincidence, and another you'll find is my Psychology Today blog, which has a lot of different stuff, including research in psychotherapy on it. And my book, Meaningful Coincidences, is the foundation of what we've been talking about today.
Available everywhere with the usual suspects. Amazon.
Yeah, I encourage people to go to the local bookstore, but yeah, you can get it. You can get it any place online.
Thanks for joining us today.
Yes, you're welcome. That was a fun conversation to be part of.
It was fun.
Yeah.
You've been listening to Conscious Living Radio, 100.5 FM in Vancouver, Co-op Radio, Wednesday nights, 6 to 7. And of course, we're on Facebook, YouTube, and all that jazz.